Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pet Business Hiring Podcast. I'm your host, Doug the Dog Guy. Today, I am joined by the OG hiring expert for the pet sitting industry, Kim Ottone Tank. Kim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
You have been in business for 35 years, and you have had employees for what, almost the entire time, longer than anyone else that I know in the industry. And I know when I was starting my business and starting to hire and transition my contractors to employees, I looked to you for a lot of support and advice and guidance. And I know so many people in the industry love to see your name pop up in the Facebook group chats. So I'm really excited to learn from you today.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Love to share about it.
Yeah, we are going to talk about paying hourly and how and why that can be such a great model for pet sitting and dog walking businesses. But before we get into that, I would love for you to take us back 35 years. What made you start a pet sitting and dog walking business?
Well, I always think it happened to me. I didn't start it, it started. I was working as a veterinary technician and just it's a natural progression. People come into the office looking for someone to pet sit for them. And the first client I had 10 whippets and she was looking for
Wow.
someone to stay overnight. And I was single at the time and sounded like fun. She later referred me to a couple of other people. So I was running around between two or three different people in the space of a few months, pet sitting for them. And so I was your classic hobbyist. This was in the early 80s. So this was a very long time ago. I was engaged to my husband, and I remember he said, "What do you mean you're going to go stay overnight with some dogs?" And, but that's how it all started. And I continued to do it as a hobby throughout the 80s because I didn't know that it could be a business. My husband Howard actually said, "Well, maybe you could just do this instead of working at the veterinary hospital." And I'm like, "No, I wouldn't be able to have enough work to be busy all day. I can't imagine that it could be a full-time thing." Um, just before the 90s started, we moved to the Bay Area. So we were in a town called Salinas in California. We moved to the San Francisco East Bay. And at that time, I was gonna be switching jobs, and he said, "Well, why don't you just do pet sitting?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anybody up there. The safe path of least resistance is to continue being a veterinary technician." But the same thing started happening again, where I would pick up all these side jobs. And at that time, we were starting our family or looking to start our family. And so I was looking at ways that I could be a stay-at-home mom and still earn an income. And really that was the primary push to make this my career because I could work around my husband's hours. And so in 1990, we decided that's when it became official. Our oldest son, he is turning 36 in May, and the business is turning 36. We went on for about 10 years where mostly I worked around his schedule. And we did tag team parenting. So we were almost always, one of us was almost always home. And that was the big push. And friends of mine would say, "I don't know how you do this with kids." Like by the 90s, I was meeting other pet sitters who were local. And I was like, how could I not do this? Because the alternative was going to a 9 to 5 job and being away from my kids all day. And that just wasn't, if there was a way to avoid that, I was going to do it. And so that's how it all worked. In 1996, I hired my first employee. So we're looking now. It'll be the 30th anniversary of being an employer this year, and so I'm kind of proud of that. We go back quite a ways with that. In the early 2000s, when I had child number 4, my husband actually quit his job, and we became totally dependent on the pet sitting, and and that is where we are today. So it's been a long but happy road of self-employment. So,
That's really beautiful. I was just talking to Colin and Megan Funkhauser from Pet Sitter Confessional about how pet sitting allowed them to be with their kids more. And I recently turned 30 and I would like to have kids sooner than later. So I'm hopefully going to be following in your footsteps, and
Awesome, awesome.
it's just so beautiful getting to hear that the business actually allowed for you to have that family connection, and I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, we were always able to go to, and even when I was working, because pet sitting is somewhat flexible, I could go out and do some visits and then go to a swim meet and then go back out and work again. So we're tried to be very present parents. And I think we instilled a good work ethic too. I mean, we have 4 kids, they're all adults and they're all employed right now. Everybody loves that.
That's
Yeah.
great. What made you bring on your first hire in '96?
Well, it was crazy because I knew I needed help. I wasn't sure why or how I was gonna the whole thing was gonna work. I just knew I needed help. We had been through a crazy year in 1995 where Howard actually worked out of state. And I had, at the time, 2 kids. I brought in a foreign exchange student to live with us because anyone who does pet sitting knows that if you do need daycare, it's not the usual hours that that people work. So, it was a very stressful time for me, and I thought, "If only I had had some help, someone I could call every once in a while to do some of the work." It was funny because even though I was fairly small, being a solo operator in 1995, I remember that summer, I didn't have a single morning or evening off. There were jobs every single time, and so it was a constant push to find someone to watch the kids unless Howard was home. He was home on brief weekends here and there. So that was my push. I realized, wow, if only I had hired someone before, because in the midst of that time, I could not possibly wrap my head around hiring someone. I was so immersed in my problem every day of childcare that I was not able to spend the time to research and do the hiring. So when things became normal again in '96 and he was working back in our local area, I decided that it was time, that I wasn't gonna go through another time like that. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with this person once I hired them, but I knew I needed someone that could possibly step in for me. And when I first hired, I really would just call him occasionally and say, "Can you help me out on this evening?" My sister got married the following year, and I needed to take a whole day off in the middle of July, and he saved me. I could be in the wedding. I took the whole day off, and then I went right back to work with all of our jobs that month without having to have said no to any of my clients. And to me, that was just huge that I could not be there and still service all of our clients, because saying no has always been very hard for me. That's one reason I had to hire help, because I just am not good at that at all. Um, and it was one of the busiest months we ever had. Then also that year, I had a third child in September, and um, she actually came on her due date, which was shocking. And I was able to, but he had been prepared no matter what day she was going to be born to step in. And my first employee, his name was David. He stepped in because I was going to the hospital. So we were able to serve the clients that I had going on at the time. And I was able to take a short maternity leave without absolutely turning everybody down. So it was amazing. And remember, I'm a person that started this with zero intention of hiring help. If you had told me that I would be an employer, if you had told me that in 2026 I'd been an employer for 30 years, I would have thought you were nuts. But here we are. It can be done, even if for people who feel they don't have the confidence to do that. You can do it. Doing the research was critical, and that helped me have a lot of confidence that I was doing things correctly.
Yeah. I also had no plan of ever hiring and growing a team, and here I am 12 years later, and
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
So I know that you are a big proponent of paying hourly instead of paying piecemeal per visit or a commission based, percentage based. We hear all these different things talked about in the pet sitter Facebook groups. You like to pay hourly. I would really love to just dig into this with you and tell me
Yes.
why and how and tell me everything.
Okay. Well, the longer I've been doing it, the more I feel it's a really good fit for me, and I think it's a good fit for most businesses. Um, One of the reasons is simply record keeping. Now, I know a lot of people have software and it will keep track of hours along with the actual visits. You can track someone's shift. Um, so I kind of feel like if you're going to be keeping those records, it makes payroll easy. You know, X number of hours times this pay rate is what they are being paid. But not just that, some of the nowadays, there are many things that are happening in the employment industry in general that are based on hourly. For example, I wasn't aware of this. I thought it was about 3 states, but it's closer to half the states now have some form of mandated sick time that is earned and accrued by the number of hours someone is working. Now, California started this, I'm going to say close to about 10 years ago. And so I would report the hours, but honestly, I was kind of fudging a little bit the hours that they worked based on the number of visits so that they could accrue their sick time. But sick time is accrued in most states, in general. An example, at least in California, 1 hour per every 30 hours worked. So if you're not tracking the hours, you would have to sort of estimate. And anytime you're estimating instead of giving the true number, you're running a risk of being challenged by that. So for payroll records, for purposes of sick time, for purposes of overtime. When you have someone who's working around the same amount of hours every week, you may not be too concerned. But what if you have an extra busy week and they do go over 40 hours a week? They need to be paid time and a half for every hour in excess of 40. And if you're in California, it's 8 hours in a day. Now, I rarely have anybody work 8 hours in a day, but it's certainly happened. Sometimes I'm submitting a quarter hour of overtime or 45 minutes of overtime, but that's legally what I must do. There are a couple of other states. I can't remember. I think Alaska may be one. Seems to be a West Coast thing. Is but everyone needs to know when overtime applies. Everyone, it's 40 hours. Again, some places it's 8 hours. So record keeping, tracking hours for purposes of overtime and sick time, those are important things. Now, you may say, well, I'm doing that. I still want to pay by the visit. And it's probably fine. But if you are in an area where your travel time is varying, if you have sitters getting stuck in traffic, it may not be enough to estimate travel time. So let's back up a little bit. If you're paying by the visit, you need to remember that you have to allow for travel time. So if you're sending people out for 30-minute visits and on average, the travel time is about 10 minutes. You're looking at, well, I need to make sure that they are paid for about 40 minutes of work. Count it one way with each visit. If you're not tracking that, you're not sure. Now, if you're paying, say, if you're in a state where minimum wage is, say, about 7.25, the federal minimum, and you're paying well above that per visit, say you're paying $12, $15 per visit, you're going, well, by the time they do 1.5 visits per hour, they're making so much above minimum wage. I don't need to worry about that. And that may be true. You're probably covered all the time. However, if you're in a state like mine, we just went to 1690. And if you are, depending on how much you're paying per visit, you could be riding pretty close to minimum wage. If you're allowing 40 minutes per visit, then we can easily say that they're averaging about 1.5 visits per hour. So you need to, obviously, you would take your per visit, say if it were $12 and add 50% to that, that person's making about $18 an hour. And that's fine. If you're in my state, however, and they get stuck in traffic for a while, they may not be getting that 1.5 visits done per hour. They might be getting 1 visit done per hour. Well, I just went way below minimum wage if I'm only paying them $12 to, you know. So it's important to know that with the drive time, it's a variable. Even if your visit time is always the same, your drive time may not be. And if you're in a state with a high minimum wage, you really do have to do your calculation and making sure you're always meeting minimum wage. And that should be for every hour they're out there.
If you want to be able to attract your ideal pet sitting and dog walking clients, you need a strong brand that will appeal to that type of person. and allow you to stand out in a crowded marketplace. And that's exactly why I used Pet Marketing Unleashed for the branding for this podcast and my entire Positive Hiring Academy. You can get $100 off of your branding day with Pet Marketing Unleashed if you put the code DTDG in the inquiry form message box. Again, that's my initials, Doug the Dog Guy, DTDG in the inquiry message box to get $100 off of your personalized branding day with Pet Marketing Unleashed.
So I give the example. One time I had a sitter stuck in traffic. She had a 10-minute drive between two visits, and it took her 40 minutes because of a traffic accident, and there was no way to get around it. And I remember joking with her, "Well, I'm sorry that happened to you. You got paid for all that time. I'm glad I pay by the hour because yeah, it's I lost some money there, but I stayed legal, and to me, that's probably like my number one goal every day is to stay legal. So, and we don't have a hard time with that because of the way we're structuring our hourly pay. There are also a few other reasons, and this applies probably more to me than some other people because I'm not boots on the ground in my territory. I live 2 hours away from my service area. And so I rely on my team to take care of little incidental tasks occasionally. I'm not, if a medication needs to be picked up from a veterinarian or we need to get a can of tuna because we need to try to encourage a cat to eat any number of things like that. I've got to send my sitters to do that, and they willingly do that because it's part of their assignment if I ask them to do that. So if you're paying by the visit, how are you paying for these little incidental things that they might have to do? If they're only getting paid when they're at a house, then how would you compensate them for extra little duties? And you may have a way to do that, but because we are automatically building those tasks into their shift and their shift they are paid by not just hourly, but think about it by the minute. So if something takes them 5 minutes, plus the travel time, but say a 5-minute task, that's built into their hourly wage. Their shift was 5 minutes longer, so I had an extra 12th of an hour to pay for. If I were to break that down and decide that that's worth doing an extra visit or something, I think it would cost me an awful lot more. I mean, it would be great for them, but at some point, we have to pick and choose the perks that we're going to offer. And if I can pay them for an extra 5 minutes, it'll help offset other times when I have to pay, like for that extra travel time and that sort of thing. Um, and also, if we ask them to do things like a meet and greet, the way we're structured currently is we do a pretty extensive phone interview with our new clients. And we are sending our team lead to most of the meet and greets. Because we have set things up so much in advance on the phone, she does not generally spend very long. Excuse me, she may. Rather than 30 minutes, she probably averages 10 to 15 minutes and sometimes barely that, just because the clients are already comfortable with us. They already know how everything works. They may ask her a few minor questions, but mostly she's there to get a little tour of the home and set up a lockbox. So if she's only there 10 minutes, we're compensating her for 10 minutes of time rather than a full visit. So it works kind of both ways. There are times where it costs us maybe a little bit more because someone is being paid for every minute. And the flip side is they're only being paid for the time they work. So for us, this works again. One of the reasons is because I rely on my sitters so much to do more than just visits. Now, if they're only doing visits and their travel time is pretty set all the time, then obviously paying by the visit can work very well. I'm just bringing up some of these things that may occasionally come to play or very frequently. And that's why for us, it it really it really changed things. For another example, We have a few clients that are on the outer edge of the territory. And because we have the model where every sitter can do every job with a couple of minor exceptions, occasionally we'll ask them to go a little bit farther out on the edge of the territory. So they're not only spending more time in the car to do that, they're putting more miles on their car doing that. They're spending more gas. Um, I do not get complaints about sitters having to do the jobs that are farther out because they are automatically compensated by that extra travel time by virtue of an extra 10 minutes in the car is an extra 10 minutes on their shift. We also compensate for mileage. So the more they drive, the more um, tax reimbursement, tax-free money they get. So that's a whole other topic. But we do our we track our mileage carefully, and we do the full federal rate on mileage reimbursement. So yes, I get people saying, "Oh God, I get tired of driving." That comes up now and then, but that's the job in general. I'm not getting complaints about specific jobs that are farther away because it's a built-in system to compensate them. I don't have to figure out, well, how much extra should I pay um, Robin for doing that visit? It's already calculated in. And I think as another thing, keep thinking of more things here. Employee perception. I mean, when you're hiring people, I think people really want to know what they're going to make per hour, rather than have to sit. And this I kind of now we are mostly 30-minute visits. We have a handful of 45-minute visits here and there, but we're mostly 30-minute visits. What I really find, which would be even more beneficial, this employee perception idea, is for the people that are offering different lengths of visits. If you're doing a 15-minute and a 30-minute and a 45, and you're going to have an employee hired to do all of these different lengths of visits, I think it's going to be like they're going to have to know rocket science to figure out what they're going to be paid. I mean, they're going to have to sit down and really calculate. And you have to sit down and really calculate, how much is each minute worth? Is the drive time between these visits the same as the longer visits? How does this all come together? So if you're paying by the hour, it's one flat rate. Now, some people really are set on the idea of paying their staff extra per pet. And I can understand why, if you're doing that, this would be a tough transition to make. But I really believe in the average effort. I believe that some jobs are easier than others, and that in the real world, people don't get different rates for different hours of their day. So I believe in a model of picking an hourly rate that's appropriate for the average amount of effort they're going to have during the day. Yeah, some jobs with more pets are going to be harder. Some with one cat are going to be easier. Although I will tell you, doing a lot of cat jobs are not easier necessarily because we have some pretty complicated ones.
Agreed.
But in general, I like to look at what the job is valued at each hour. And I think if you want to charge extra per pet because it's more responsibility for your business and more risk, it's totally fine. I don't see as a problem with keeping that and having that a small benefit to your company, but to have the same hourly rate for your people. Um, and one more thing. In California, we have paid rest breaks, and there are other states that do as well. Now, growing up in California, I've always known I was supposed to get a break. I worked for a lot of veterinary hospitals that didn't worry about it a whole lot, but I know we're supposed to get at least a 10-minute break for every 4-hour shift. Not every state does this. I always thought this was a federal thing, but it's not. However, if you are going, the federal law that I have researched, my understanding is that if you're going to offer a break, a rest break to your team, and you may decide after a certain amount of hours that you would like to do that for them. If it's 20 minutes or less, the federal government mandates that that be a paid rest break. So if you're paying by the visit, how are you going to make that rest break paid? So if you have a sitter who's doing 6 visits and it's taking them about 4 hours, and you tell them, "Hey, take a 15-minute break." but you're still paying them only for the 6 visits, then it's not a paid rest break. If they're making the same amount as doing 6 visits without a break versus 6 visits with a break, that's not a paid rest break. So I think as this industry evolves and we have more people taking this on as a serious career, I think as a whole, we're going to have to look at the whole rest break situation. And this is something to keep in mind that we need a way to do that. It was interesting because I listen, for fun. I attend California seminars on employment, and they did bring this up that apparently in California you still can pay per piece in some industries, but they brought up that if you pay per piece, you have to calculate the number of hours and the number of breaks that they should be entitled to, and you have to tack that on by the end of the week onto, you have to calculate what that time is worth and pay the people that money. So, again, this is one way that hourly just takes care of all that. Occasionally, we will have a little gap in our schedule now. The way we cluster our visits, we almost never have anyone that has a break where they have time to kill in between visits. But occasionally it will come up. And this has happened a couple times lately because we are kind of quiet right now. It's January. I'll just tell them, hey, just stay on the clock, take a half an hour break. And we're just, and it's just an extra little benefit for having to put up with the fact that their schedule is not meshing exactly the way I would like it to. Now, occasionally we'll have someone who is working enough to take a lunch break. That is not typically a break of 30 minutes or over. You would generally not have to pay. But the concept of these short breaks in between things, this enables me to easily pay people for that. And so I think that is something that everyone should keep in mind. I mean, it is even if you don't have to offer breaks, it's certainly a perk that you can offer to your team. And this is one way to make sure that they get it on the clock. So, um,
It sounds
and
like paying hourly really just helps keep everything clear for the
yes,
employee and for you as the employer. I don't know where I heard this, but I've heard this within the last couple of days that clarity is kindness. And I have that ringing in my brain right now, listening to you talk about why to pay hourly. Um, Especially when you were given the example of paying more for additional pets. If they're making one rate for a 15-minute visit and then a different rate for a 30-minute visit, and it's one rate at each of these visits for one pet and then a different rate
mm,
at 45, it gets so confusing. And like you said, it's ends up being rocket science to figure out how much they're getting paid. And I don't wanna do rocket science as the business owner, and I know they sure
yeah.
don't wanna do rocket science either.
And I was listening to someone talk about that one time, whereas they said they were giving their sitters a choice on the jobs they wanted to do. And so everyone was competing for the jobs where they were going to get paid more. Well, that's great that they want to do them, but that's going to put you out of balance. You need all of your work covered, not just the ones with the higher paycheck. So it evens out. There's not an incentive to compete for certain jobs versus others. And then there was something one day. I was out just letting random thoughts go through my head. And I had another thought that say you have two sitters out working today, and they both have 4 visits. And for whatever reason, it just so happens that sitter A has a 5-minute commute between each. You just had a really good route for them. And sitter B, for whatever reason, was doing a series of jobs that took 15 minutes in travel time. So if you're paying by the visit, at the end of the day, sitter A made the same amount of money for working a lot less time. Like at least, let's see, at least a half an hour less because each travel time in between was 10 minutes less than sitter B, who made the same amount of money but had to do a lot more work. I mean, a half an hour is significant. And so I think the hourly brings about fairness. Now, it's a different variable. You don't know how long the visits are going to take in general. So you have a variable. Your time is the variable. Um, And so you do have to look at it. It's never going to necessarily be exact. You can do your best calculation and it won't always be exactly what they made per visit. But in general, it should be close and at least it's fair. And over time, after you've converted to hourly for a long time, it'll just simply be what it is. There's no comparison anymore. And obviously, that's why it's easier to bring on new people hourly. But after a period of time, and when I talk to people about converting to hourly, I do also say, um, well, I encourage them to kind of err on the side of caution. You don't want to pick a number that's way too high because you're not going to back down. No one wants to go to their employee saying, I'm paying you too much. I need to pay you less. However, you can always go and say, hey, this hourly thing is working out great. We want to bump you up a couple dollars because we underestimated. Um, and so I think employees have to have a certain amount of understanding that this is a new thing for you. But I think it does come down to fairness. I think most people put a value on the work on not actually the actions of what they do throughout a day, but the time they spend doing it. And I think the world revolves around time-based activities. Now, I do get the question a lot. Well, Kim, most times my sitters are going out for only one visit at a time, or what happens when it's only one visit at a time? Well, most of us who work in shifts and have the occasional one-off where it's one, we usually pay for a full hour, regardless of, even if it's a few minutes travel, 30-minute visit, a few minutes travel home. Obviously, we want to make it worth it for people to go out and do one. Someone did bring this up in one of the forums, which I found very interesting, and it caused me to really think about this a lot. What if you have a lot of one-off visits, but only occasionally are they going out for two and you're paying by the hour? So you could get into a position where someone is getting an hour's pay for one, and then when they're doing two, they're getting an hour and 15 minutes pay because it was half an hour, 15 minutes of travel, another half an hour. That does seem pretty lopsided. That takes away the incentive to do two visits because they're only getting a fraction more. So I understand that. And so I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. I think obviously the hourly model does work better when you're having clusters of visits. And I can't speak for everyone, but my goal has always been to provide a cluster of work. I don't know very many people that want to work for an hour here and an hour there. Mine has always been, let's give them a chunk of work and then large chunks of time off. So I've always, well, at least for the last 20 something years, made sure that everyone is on no more than 5 days a week, occasionally a sixth day, but they don't ever work 7 days a week. If there's an emergency, they're in overtime and we deal with them. But I think so many people now are going to working on the dog walking model, promoting the dog walks, that everyday business, going to a Monday through Friday model. Obviously, you're going to have shifts with that. Most people are going to go out and do several dog walks. So that's a great way to do hourly. And most of us with pet sitting, I do believe we like to cluster the visits. Now, I understand there could be some people that for example, I have an employee who has another job who doesn't mind doing one or two in the morning before work and one or two after. Um, and in that case, I could see why doing a lot of one-offs or single visits works. But I think that's more the exception. I could be wrong. I don't know how many businesses are actually operating on a model where they are constantly sending someone for just one. But in that case, I think you do obviously have to make it worth it for them to go out to do one. And that may be the way you want to go, is a per visit model. However, if you're working towards the hourly model, I would still encourage you. Excuse me. If you're working towards the hourly model and doing shifts, I would still encourage you to do the hourly model, because if you are paying enough per visit to make it worth their while, and then you're all of a sudden they're going out for 4 visits and you're paying that higher rate for 4 visits, it's going to cost you more than simply working out a fair rate per hour, because you're paying them on this higher rate to make justify one visit times 4. So it's something to look at. Everyone has to examine their own business. Is this and obviously from the employee's perspective, if you're going to convert. But I think in the long run, if you're looking at the shift model at all, and I'm talking 2 to 4 hours of work, then hourly, I think again, it goes back to everything I said. I really think it's the best model all the way around.
Yeah. I know one fear that people have about going to the hourly model is what's to stop them from saying, okay, I know this is a 30-minute visit, but I'm going to stay 35 or 40, or maybe I'll swing through the Starbucks drive through between visits. Do you see that happen with your team? And what's your thought on that?
I've had people ask me that a lot, and honestly, I think my team takes it pretty seriously. I don't think it ever occurred to them to do that. I could be living under a rock, but, um, people have asked me what's to prevent them from milking the clock, and I always turn it around and I say, "Well, if you're paying by the visit, what's to prevent them from shortening the visit?" Because if they're getting paid X number of dollars for a visit, how about if I make the visit shorter and then I still make the same amount of money? So it works both ways. Now, obviously, we're tracking time just like most of us are using software that measures the, length of a visit. So again, that works both ways. I can see if they're constantly, checking out late, and I can always ask them, "Hey, what's going on?" Usually they'll say, "Hey, you know what? I found some diarrhea at the last minute as I'm walking out the door. I had to run back in and clean it all up. I was there an extra 10 minutes." Totally makes sense. But it all comes down to this. It's a disciplinary issue, and I use that term, I don't really think of it as discipline, but it in the HR sense, it's a disciplinary issue rather than a financial issue. In other words, if you're seeing a pattern of this happening, then you address it, as an issue rather than, worrying about it once or twice that it happens. But it again, it's I would rather have my people spend more time at a visit than less time. So I found that our the quality of our work, I don't know, it's kind of hard to quantify, but I believe since I went to hourly that I have much more easier time getting people to spend the whole time. I don't have an issue. They all do spend the time. That's no problem. And I think, it's possible before we were tracking it as carefully as we are now, they may have been cutting some corners. I can't say for sure, because, we didn't always have, our software we didn't always have the capabilities, but I'm confident because they're being paid by the hour. Now, when you mentioned going through Starbucks drive-through, honestly, if they do that once in a while, that's okay with me because they're probably not taking all the breaks they're supposed to. They are supposed to take their breaks. And I don't think they always do because sometimes they want to get home. And I don't mind if they go through Starbucks occasionally. So I could call me crazy. But I think that's fine. Every once in a while, if there's a long time between visits. I mean, what we do is we spot check. We spot check through the records to see. Uh, and every so often on payroll, I run an hourly versus number of visits for each team member to see how many we're generating per hour, and it's usually right on the money. Um, so I was pretty excited after I did the payroll for Christmas week because I looked at the hours versus number of visits, and normally they're around 1.43 to 1.5, and it was more like 1.6, 1.7 visits per hour because we were able to cluster the visits so closer together because we were so busy. And I was like, yeah, that brought down my numbers quite a bit. So tracking hourly has so many benefits to the health of your business to see that. And again, remember, I've been paying by the hour and I'm happy with my results on their efficiency and what they're doing.
That's great. That's great. I agree with what you said so much that I would much rather someone spend an extra 5 or 10 minutes at a client's home rather than try to cut it a couple minutes short.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't mind if somebody goes to the Starbucks drive-through every now and then either.
Yeah, yeah. If I can give them a little perk now and then. If it were happening, if I thought something was happening all the time, I'd have a chat with them. But an occasional thing like that, again, it's probably making up for a break they forgot to take. So I'm good with that.
This report that you're pulling where it says the number of visits per hour, is that through Time to Pet? Are you
No,
able to
that's
pull that
just my own
directly?
calculation. So when I'm doing payroll, they have a timesheet. We submit their hours. So I just take their hours and look at the number, and then I go to my database and look at the number of visits they did. Just do a quick math calculation. So
Okay.
I just do it myself. I spot check it. I'm sure I could have my sister write something into our program that would do that. I use a custom software that was created just for me. So um,
Yeah.
maybe that's something she should put in there. I'm sure she'd love that. So-
If you are looking for the best way to handle scheduling and invoicing for your pet sitting and dog walking business, as well as a way to keep track of all of your clients' notes and instructions, and have a way for them to digitally agree to your terms of service and even instant message with your team and get report cards from each of their pet sits and dog walks, I use Time to Pet, and Time to Pet has been a game changer for my business. You can save 50% off of your first 4 months if you sign up with my special link, timetopet.com/Doug. Again, that is 50% off of your first 4 months with my link, timetopet.com/Doug. How much time do you think it takes you on a weekly basis or however often you do payroll to kind of check over their routes and their hours and just make sure everything is correct? Is this very time consuming or is it
no,
fairly easy?
I don't always even do it. So had a particular interest through the last 2 weeks of December because it was a larger than normal payroll. And if things were way out of whack with, double the normal visits, I needed to make sure I was funding my payroll account appropriately. About halfway through the pay period, I just ran my numbers and I probably spent a half an hour on it, just kind of checking. And when I spot checked, it was coming out, I liked the numbers. So I did it again at the in the payroll. Payroll itself, maybe it just depends. It might take me 15 to 30 minutes. We're semi-monthly, so twice a month. And then I might spend another 20 to 30 minutes kicking around the numbers because when I enjoy math a little bit. Uh, so not a lot of time. It's fairly easy to just, do that quick calculation. I'll spot check. I'll go through the visits and see, well, how long did it take to get from A to B? Again, I don't do it with every visit, just enough to see. And if someone is way out of whack, I'm probably going to catch it. So, like, for example, one person was tracking her mileage incorrectly, and I caught it, and I talked to her about it, and I said, "No, I'm not. Um, technically, I overpaid you for some, but that's fine. We're not gonna go back and change that. We're just gonna do it right going forward." That's just how I do things.
Well, it's relieving to hear that it doesn't take you a lot of time and it's not super complicated.
No, no, it's really not. And I think everyone has a feel for their territory and how far apart things are and how much time things should take. So it's just a matter of taking a quick look over. If something seems unusual, you can dig deeper into their whole route. You can ask them questions and see. Um, Most of the time, if something takes an extra long time, we have a space on our timesheet they can make notes about, the reason why something might have taken longer. And they do that occasionally. So, or if they have to pick up a key. Now, we hardly have any keys we have to pick up anymore, but occasionally someone will have to go get a key or a fob or something, and they might make that note, and it's not even necessary most of the time, but they do it anyway. So, and that's fine with me. So.
Yeah. I'm curious with this model of paying hourly and scheduling in shifts with clustered visits like this. Are you ever guaranteeing any hours? And what happens if you schedule someone to work, a 4 hour shift and then a couple of those clients cancel? How does all that work?
So I don't guarantee anything at all. Most of the time, January is an exception. It's really slow for us this time of year. It's always been this way, so I don't try not to be alarmed because it's been this way for 35 years. Most of the time throughout the year, I'm able to give my sitters a consistent number of hours. And then the overflow would go to my floaters, who then I will ask them, hey, can you help us out on Tuesday or Wednesday? So most of the time, most of the year, they're at capacity because I know how much work they want to do, and I can make sure they have that. And again, it's more of a question of the overflow. This is the only time of year where there is less than usual. And so I will often ask them, hey, did you want to take an extra day off? And a lot of times they'll go, you know what? I got a lot of stuff going on. I'd love to take Monday off. Um, so I have managed to maintain good staffing without having to guarantee hours. That could possibly change at some point in the future. Um, and I could see going to that, but at this time, it hasn't really come up that much. And what was your other question about? Oh, if someone cancels. Okay. Um, Oftentimes, if someone cancels, we can fill it with someone else who might have been feeling like they had too many that day or were at their limit, and I might ask them, "Would you like me to take this one off your schedule?" And we can hand it to the other person. It's rare that a big chunk ever cancels. So, they might have 7 visits and 1 cancels, and generally, that's not a huge difference in the amount of hours they're gonna work. In other words, when I'm scheduling a shift, I'm giving them a certain number of visits, but I'm not telling them you're working 8 to 12. So there isn't an expectation that I'm working exactly 4 hours. So they understand there is flexibility because they also might get an extra one added on. And in that case, obviously, if it's that day, I will ask them if they can accommodate an extra visit. If it's not the day of, I'm just assigning. They're just getting their schedule the day before they find out how many they have. Um, and I always ask for a lot of communication. If it's too little, if it's too much, let me know and I will fix whatever I can with your schedule. So I have a lot of flexibility on my team is very flexible with me because for the most part I've been able to keep them within a range. Let's say there's a range of hours that they want to work. And they all kind of understand this time of year. So no, I haven't been in that situation where I have had to guarantee, and we generally don't. Now, a last minute cancellation, we often will pay them for that visit if but generally because I don't post the schedule a long time ahead of time, cancellations aren't a thing because they haven't even seen their schedule yet. So we have time to go in and fix it. If we see that a day is particularly slow for them, we have time to go in and rearrange the schedule to make it better for them. So I think I'm on the fly with the scheduling, but I think it lowers the expectations. I don't know. It's more of a surprise. What am I doing tomorrow? So
I love it. That's great. So, when you're hiring someone, is this just tell me if I have a good idea here. You're hiring someone, you say in the job ad and in the interview, I need you to be available from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m., Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And then when that week rolls around, you say, okay, on this day you have 2 visits within this window, and then this other day you have 4 visits within this window, and it kind of varies, but they kind of have a general sense of when they should be available and when you're going to need them, and then you plug in what you have within that window. Is that
that's
how it works?
That's pretty close to it. I mean, I generally don't name a certain time, but I might say 2 or 3 hours, and that would be and I mean, we're hoping to be putting out an ad like that soon. We're trying to increase our dog walking, and we're definitely that point going to be looking for midday dog walkers. Um Most of my sitters have evolved from one point to another, like, they may have started out on weekends and then they went to weekdays. So, it's a constantly changing thing, and when I am advertising for an ad, I'm looking at my greatest need, and I'm giving them an approximation. But it's not like, "I need you 9 to 5, and you're gonna be in this place, for 8 like a different sort of job." Um, so, we have to be kind of vague. We just have to be. And I ask them, generally when we're hiring for pet sitting, we like them to be available from 7 in the morning on, and ask if they're available evenings, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's vague. I'm not sure how else to define it, and we kind of work with some people in that if they seem like a really good fit, but they're not quite available quite as much as we would like, we still would often bring them on because we can plug people in so many different places, especially someone who wants extra hours, and they'll say, "Yeah, call me." So it's a kind of a fluid situation with the hiring.
Yeah. Yeah, it's same with my business on that. Um, you have just answered so many questions here. I mean, and I didn't even have to ask any of my list of questions. You knew where I wanted to take this. Just proof of how much experience and wisdom and expertise you have here, and I
Thanks.
just can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us today, Kim.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Is there any other, little bits of wisdom, any other tips or tricks or anything you wanna mention here at the end?
Well, like I just said, one of the things that I encourage people to do is to be flexible with someone who's a really good hire but can't work like one of the shifts that you want them to work. Um, your needs change, their needs change. If you find the right people, bring them on. A lot of people say always be hiring. I have two things in my life. Always be charging because my phone is always be hiring. So so that's one thing. Another thing is really look at being the type of employer that you wanna be. I've learned over the years to look back on the people I've worked for and try to emulate the qualities in the ones that I loved working for, and not do the things of the people that I didn't like working for. Be the employer that you wish you had, and try to look at things from your employee's perspective, and I think that'll serve you really well. I think if you Another thing is when there's a problem and someone makes a huge mistake, is to try to take a deep breath for 10 seconds before you react, because the goal is gonna be to figure out how to solve the problem rather than to get angry or say what you really want to say. Have to hold back on that a little bit and look about how to solve the problem. So, I think that's one thing that I have, um, learned over the years for sure. I think it helps a lot.
That is such great advice and sometimes easier said than done.
Yes.
We need that reminder though, and it's definitely something that I have had to consciously work on over the years and will continue working on it. Um, well, Kim, you did a bonus lesson talking more about how and why to pay hourly for my positive hiring course. The lesson is incredible. It is so valuable. And thank you so much for providing that to the course. And anyone listening at home, if you're interested in the hiring course and hearing more about how and why to pay hourly from Kim, you can go to positivehiringcourse.com. That's positive with a PAW and enroll in the course at any time there. And then Kim actually does one on one consultations. Can you tell us some more about that?
Sure. Well, I do one-on-one. Um it's just a very small part of my business, but if anyone is interested in chatting with me about hiring, one of the easiest ways to get in touch with me is on Facebook through Kim Ottone Tank, and the middle part is Ottone. Um, and through our business, I think the easiest website is, email address is reservations, that's reservation with an S, at apronstringsonline.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Yeah, just a little fun thing I do.
That's great. I mean, you provide so much value to the industry by doing that. And I will make sure to include your information down in the podcast description below so people can click right through and get in contact with you.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on, Kim. This was an incredible conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, my name's Doug the Dog Guy. That's Kim Ottone Tank, and this was the Pet Business Hiring Podcast. We are reminding you to stay positive.